last January, you pledged to support a filibuster of a warrantless surveillance bill if it included retroactive immunity for telecommunications. Last week, the House passed a bill that effectively gives the telecoms that immunity. You said you would support it, and explaining the change, you said it was you were talking. It was in light of the security threats facing the country. Can you explain how the security threats facing the country are any different today than they were in January when you said you would support a filibuster?
Well, the bill has changed. So I don't think the security threats have changed. I think the security threats are similar. My view on FISA has always been that the issue of the phone companies per se is not one that overrides the security interests of the American people. I do want accountability and making sure that, as I've said before, somebody's watching the watchers, that you don't have an administration that feels that it can make its own determinations about when warrantless wiretaps are applicable without going through a FISA court. And that's what we had, that's the system that we had previously. And I think that if you look at why people were concerned about the original bill, it wasn't simply that we wouldn't be able to sue the phone companies. I would be happy with a system that discloses what's happened and makes sure that we prevent violations of the American people's privacy, even if the phone companies are held harmless. The issue was, can we get to the bottom of what's been taking place, and most importantly, do we have safeguards going in place going into the future so that American civil liberties are not being violated. It is a close call for me, but I think that the current legislation, with the exclusivity provision that says a president, whether it's George Bush or myself or John McCain, can't make up rationales for getting around the FISA court, can't suggest that somehow there is some law that stands above the laws passed by Congress in engaging in warrantless wiretaps. The fact that that provision is in there, I think, is very important and provides us protection going forward. The fact that there's an inspector general in place to investigate what happened previously gives us insight into what has happened retrospectively. And so, that, in my mind, met my basic concerns. And given that all the information I've received is that the underlying program itself actually is important and useful to American security as long as it has these constraints on them, I felt it was more important for me to go ahead and support this compromise.
Let me ask you, what were your thoughts about Ralph Nader's comments that you are trying to talk white and appeal to white guilt so that you don't seem like a Jesse Jackson and you're not confronting real problems in the African American community? He was pretty brutal.
Look, first of all, what's clear is Ralph Nader hadn't been paying attention to my speeches because all the issues that he talked about, whether it's predatory lending or the housing foreclosure crisis or what have you, are issues that the traveling press can tell you I've devoted multiple speeches, town hall meetings to throughout this campaign. Ralph Nader's trying to get attention. He's become a perennial political candidate. I think it's a shame because if you look at his legacy in terms of consumer protections, it's an extraordinary one. But at this point, he's somebody who's trying to get attention and whose campaign hasn't gotten any traction. Better way to get some traction than to make an inflammatory statement like the one that he made. It is what it is.
Senator, what's your reaction to the Supreme Court decision today striking down the death penalty for a child rapist?
I disagree with the decision. I have said repeatedly that I think that the death penalty should be applied in very narrow circumstances for the most egregious of crimes. I think that the rape of a small child, 6 or 8 years old, is a heinous crime. And if a state makes a decision that under narrow, limited, well-defined circumstances, the death penalty is at least potentially applicable, that does not violate our Constitution. Now, I think it's, had the Supreme Court said, we want to constrain the abilities of states to do this to make sure that it's done in a careful and appropriate way, that would have been one thing. But it basically had a blanket prohibition, and I disagree with that decision. Yeah.
Al Gore and John Edwards endorsed you in big arenas with big crowds. Former President Clinton issues a somewhat tepid statement through an aide. Are you worried about, do you need to hear more from the former president? Are you worried about the party truly uniting if you don't get a more full-throated endorsement from the former president?
No, because I'm going to be appearing with Senator Hillary Clinton, the former president's wife, who was involved in an epic, historic primary with me, and then I'm going to be campaigning with her on Friday. So it's understandable that the former president wouldn't want to upstage what is going to be, I think, a terrific unity event over the next day and a half. Now, if the question is, do I want Bill Clinton campaigning for us for the ticket leading into November, the answer is absolutely yes. I want him involved. He is a brilliant politician. He was an outstanding president. And so I want his help not only in campaigning, but also in governing. And I'm confident that I'll get that help. Lee?
Senator, expanding on the statement that you made yesterday about the violence in Zimbabwe and the elections that are coming up, is it your sense that the UN and some of the regional groups in the area haven't done enough? And if that's the case, what do you think the next step should be taken by the UN and by the U.S.?
Well, I think they haven't done enough. I actually had a conversation with who we anticipate will be the next head of the South African government, Minister Zuma, and encouraged and urged him to speak out more forcefully on what was happening. This was before Mr. Tsvangirai decided to withdraw from the election. What's happening in Zimbabwe is tragic. This is a country that used to be the breadbasket of Africa, and Mugabe has run the economy into the ground. He has perpetrated extraordinary violence against his own people. What is remaining of this election is a complete and total sham. I don't think that whatever the results of this election on Friday, that Mugabe will be able to claim any sort of legitimacy as a democratically elected leader in Zimbabwe. And not only do I think that the United Nations needs to continue to apply as much pressure as possible on the Mugabe government, but in particular other African nations, including South Africa, I think have to be much more forceful in condemning the extraordinary violence that's been taking place there. And frankly, they have been quiet for far too long and allowed Mugabe to engage in this sort of anti-colonial rhetoric that is used to distract from his own profound failures as a leader.